Hello everyone, what's up? Force here, bringing you a strategy video today. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Terran strategy. In this particular video, our Terran player here is Riptide, and the Protoss opponent is Liquid Hey Pro. So again, we're going to be looking at a Terran strategy. Just going to be fast forwarding through these beginning stages. Now what we're looking at specifically today is essentially, as far as the build is concerned, we're going to be looking at kind of a delayed 3 barracks build and getting a fast expansion. We're also going to be taking a look at the pros and cons of walling off. We'll talk about what's bad and dangerous about it and what's beneficial about it. And then we're just going to be looking at good old counterattacks. You know, if you fend off a strong push from your opponent, counterattacks are always going to be a wise thing. It's going to allow you to see expansion-wise what they have going on. It's going to also let you apply a lot of pressure, because a lot of times people kind of more or less put everything they got into a push, and if it doesn't work, then you can counterattack and do quite a bit of damage. That's the general idea, the general mentality about it. And also the idea of pushing out once you have some sort of set advantage. For example, in this matchup, pushing out once the medevacs come out, obviously giving you that advantage, the healing, the mobility, all of those things. So I'm going to be slowing it down right now. Now in terms of build order, let's talk about the really beginning stages here. Very basic stuff. Starting off with that 10 depot, moving off with a 12 barracks, and then a 14 refinery, and then right after that, going to be getting an orbital command at 16. Now, you can see right now, Riptide has pulled guys off of the refinery, and why is he doing that? Well, again, we're going to be going for a really early expansion now. In getting that refinery saturated, what that means is you're gathering less resources. Now, if you're going for something like a really quick expansion, it's not a terrible idea to pull guys off gas. And you're going to ask, well, why did he put guys on gas in the first place? Well, you can see a reactor is coming down, and that was in fact placed down to 21 supply after getting out a few Marines. You can see those 3 right there. And then after that point, pulling the guys off gas to get yourself up to those 400 minerals to get that command center. That's going to be a 21 supply again, and then you can go ahead and put guys right back on gas. Now, never be afraid to do something like that. If it's what your build warrants, and it's not going to be a bad idea at all. Pulling guys off gas momentarily to get that extra influx of minerals to get out a quick expansion can definitely prove to be beneficial for you. Now, let's talk about a couple other things. You can see this bunker just out of nowhere, basically. You may ask, well, why did he go for the bunker? What was the main purpose of that? Well, the idea, of course, is that in going for this early command center, this really fast expansion, you're going to be really vulnerable. And then also the fact that we don't have marauders anywhere on the board right now. You can see, of course, that the opponent here is a Protoss player, and having marauders to deal with early aggression is, of course, quite important, because otherwise it can be very difficult, very much a headache to deal with. So in terms of walling off, let's talk about walling off momentarily. What's the pros, what's the cons? Well, of course the pros are that you control the flow into your base. You know what I mean? You control the flow of units into your base. Having a wall off allows you to basically delay any sort of really heavy pushes. Now, on the flip side of the coin, the real dangerous part about a wall off, of course, is the fact that you are liable to lose those buildings in a push. So in a scenario like playing against a Zerg player, controlling the flow into your base. Well, yes, Zerglings inside your base, absolutely devastating. I'm going to pause right here momentarily. So, obviously against Zerg, quite necessary. Against Protoss, not as necessary. Controlling Zealot movement obviously is a good idea, especially early game when you lack Concussive Shell. Once you get Concussive Shell, that's not so necessary. But before Concussive Shell, having Zealots chase down and chop your Marines can be quite devastating. So that's the pro. Now the con is what we're going to be seeing right here. The con in going for this wall off is that you are very liable to lose these buildings. Now we're going to see Hey Pro is going to be target firing down that bunker, taking out those Marines, but that's not so much of a concern. I mean, we expect to sacrifice the bunker. The real problem is losing these depots here that make up part of the wall off. Now, something I've mentioned many times before in the past is that if you're pushed out early and you lack the forces to deal with it, you're obviously outnumbered. Pulling forward SCVs helps a lot. You're going to see the distracting fire, see how they were target firing those SCVs instead of the Marines. That's one of the main purposes behind it. Also, of course, those SCVs do a little bit of extra damage, but the fact that the enemy forces become focused on those SCVs instead of your actual damage-dealing units, that's the real benefit to it. That's the real pro. And again, right here, we're going to see a positive thing about the wall wall off. You saw the control of traffic into the base. Again, those zealots were forced to move around. And like I mentioned, until you have that concussive shell, not really going to be able to handle the zealots chasing down. It becomes just a little bit more difficult. Obviously, once Stim Pack comes out, it becomes much easier to do as well. But kiting without concussive shell is much, much more difficult, of course. So that's, part of the reason why this wall off definitely helps in the early game. So again, we went for that quick expansion. That's what we saw Riptide do. Going for that wall off to deal with this type of early aggression. You can see that's in fact exactly what HeyPro did. Pushed out really early with the aggression. But again, the real disadvantage to doing something like this is losing these buildings up front. You can see right there Riptide getting supply blocks. Obviously, that's a bit detrimental right there. Now, at this point, probably going for a concussive shell right now would be a good idea. Can also see that he's going to be coming out with the second refinery. A push like this can be really dangerous and frustrating to deal with because of this very reason. Getting force fielded and losing half your troops to what he has at the bottom. Very hard to deal with, very, very difficult to contend with, obviously. But what's going to happen here is we're going to see Riptide's going to get ready to tech up, get ready to kind of move to that next step. That's his plan anyways. I'm going to be prepared to move to the next step, going to be getting the factory, then the starport, and coming out with some medevacs. Now, we've talked about the front here, and we've kind of focused on the wall off and everything like that, and even just dealing with this engagement. Like I said, pulling down SCV is absolutely vital to early game defense. Now, what we're going to take a look at next is just the build order. I want to go over that one more time. Now, we last saw this, obviously in an ideal world, right? This wouldn't have happened. We would have seen Riptide expand, and he would have gotten that nice economic advantage, and then continue to pump out of the 3 racks. And again, huge problem when walling off, losing those depots. Very, very frustrating to deal with. But after that 21 command center that we saw over here, after that there were 2 barracks dropped down at 23 supply. And then as soon as those came up, basically dropping down those tech labs, and then at 34 supply there was the research of stim and combat shield. And that's actually just when Riptide was hit. And so he's been spending all this time trying to defend against it. And you can see doing a pretty good job. Marines and Marauders, of course, going to be very, very strong against this gateway heavy army. And just continue to mass up those forces. And like I said, if a strong push comes into your base, just pull down SCVs in order to deal with it. But what's going to happen here is now that he's going to be going up to medevacs, he's going to be able to leave his base. And actually, it turns out that HeyPro does end up vacating before that point. But if you're boxed in like this, again, teching up and getting those medevacs is going to allow you to leave pretty safely. And allow you to go ahead and try to perform some drops, and that's going to be the idea. And that's obviously what Riptide was planning to do here, but again, we are going to see HeyPro leave out of the base. So, like I mentioned, pushing out with counterattacks, he's going to defend this, and we'll just fast forward just a little bit. Go. Another thing too I want to take a look at is using factories for high ground scouting. Getting a look at what's going on, also dropping it into your opponent's base, maybe making some Hellions while you're pushing out of the front. That's definitely an option. Now, what's going to happen here is that's what Riptide plans to do, but during this engagement, he's actually really focused onto the micro and ends up not using that factory, and it actually ends up just kind of hanging out over here. So it doesn't quite use it to the full effectiveness. You can see it just kind of moseying on over, but that's okay. And we're going to see him push out with this counterattack. Also at that very same time, that's when he's going to be dropping the expansion. Right away, almost, you want to make sure you just grab about half those SCVs, pull them on over again, try to even that distribution as much as possible. If you don't already know, microing away from melee units like Zealots, very, very important. Using that concussive shell to slow them down, basically just clicking behind your units and hitting S, and then doing it again and hitting S. Quite effective at kiting. That's also, of course, going to be effective against things like Zerglings, any of those melee units. Also workers, too, using that same general mentality of back and S, back and S, back and S. You can see he's doing it right here. And like I said, again, getting that expansion saturated. Unfortunately, hasn't transitioned that yet. I think he is just a little too focused on this attack right now. And that's quite fine, of course, because he's going to end up winning right here. So the major talking points and the major things that we looked at in this particular video, again, were that early game, as far as the build is concerned, taking a look at that nice, I really like that actually, that opening up with the 1 racks, going into a fast expand, and then transitioning into that 2 racks with those tech labs. Now, of course, again, the real danger in that is what we saw here, a fast push, and again, HeyPro did move out with a really early push, very, very early aggression. So getting a bunker is going to let you deal with that. Again, controlling that flow of traffic, but realize at the same time you're making those buildings very vulnerable, and you are very likely to lose those supply depots. And then once you can manage to push out out of your base. Different sorts of options you have. We did see Riptide was planning on getting a factory inside of his base. You could do, again, two things. It can be used to make some Hellions in the back of the base, or just getting vision of the high ground. But obviously at this point he also had the medevacs for that, so that wasn't quite as necessary. But again, the idea of kind of, you know, attacking at the front, trying to distract him, dropping a factory in the back, making some Hellions, and then roasting the probes, that can be quite effective, especially if it's not spotted. You do of course have to worry about things like pylons on the edge, but if that's not the case, then again, could be quite an effective strategy. So yeah, the main things, like I said, I wanted to focus on were just the build in general. And again, obviously the build, it didn't go quite the way he would have liked it to. You know, going for that expansion at 21 supply. Obviously would have liked to get that down much earlier than he did. But, you know, he had to defend against early aggression, and sometimes that's just what you have to do. And if you're clearly outnumbered, bring down some of these hero SCVs. We saw that distracting fire at work. You could see how the Stalkers and the Zealots were focusing on the SCVs instead of attacking the Marines and Marauders, and that's the ideal situation. That's exactly what you want. So as always, guys, this has been Force from Force Strategy Gaming. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I'm going to leave the build order in the description if you like the build. And again, obviously in most games you're going to try to actually expand instead of keeping it in your base and defending a push. But yeah, if you like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and as always, keep watching and keep owning.